Making a video. Yep, just sort of a regular video, but with a little bit of editing, I imagine. That's what it should have anyway. So the background should be some sort of just clips from a broken Sony camera I got, and yeah, it takes pretty good video. So anyway, it might be useful in the future for enhancement of the presentation of the argumentation. Something like that anyway. So, just an experiment, another one. Yeah, see how it goes. Uh, so yeah, this is sort of banging into the what the fuck video in the sense that that's sort of what's inspired the thoughts, but they're just kind of this general, I've been here before kind of quandary of the fact that all these people, all of us, if there is such a us thing, come into the world kind of the same way. We all live on the same planet, and yet we react to it and interact with it in very different ways. Um, you know, Everybody's brain is doing a different thing with the information that's in the, that can be picked, seen, heard, experienced, and just because there's so much of it, there's just so many little changes you can make. So this is kind of like the twin study thing where you can take, there's two observations you can make out of that kind of data. The first one is that, there is this basic underlying theme that sort of pushes people in directions, no matter what happens. So that's like the separated twins. And then you have the opposite effect where twins are raised in exactly the same environment and they sort of come out like, Jack and Jill or something. Different. Substantially different sometimes in personality. And all you can blame for that is that, you know, little things were different. Uh, you know, One got sick, another one didn't get sick at a certain time, or some other kind of thing. They had a different life experience, and it left their brain dented in a different way, and they became different people. So we have those two kinds of competing ideas. One that, your genetics is going to push you to a place, in a direction. It's going to keep trying to go that way. Even if your personal experience tries to jiggle you out of that, you'll sort of still end up going in that direction, kind of a thing. You have that kind of personality, whatever. Um, and this counter argument that jiggle can get rather dramatic if you really look at it. But anyway, so we're just sitting here with this dilemma that human beings are just so different, and and then very different people. People living and raised in, born to very different circumstances can end up, ending up in the same kind of mental condition in the sense that their brain processes the world in much the same way in terms of what it reacts to, what it doesn't react to, what breaks its little heart, and what doesn't, what breaks its spirit, all of that kind of crap. So anyway, it's just very, it's part of the challenge of communicating is understanding, those differences, and how, if there's a way, to fight against it, to try to mitigate, to compensate for that variance. So terms like know thyself, cliches like that and all that kind of stuff kind of come to mind in that kind of conversation, in the sense that if we could agree on what we are and where we came from, what produced us, that seems to me to be an awful lot of agreement in terms of where you can go from there, what you can make out of that, what it sort of means or indicates. And so this is sort of where it bangs into the what the fuck, because it's like a Snake Plisskenus, Lord Savior guy now, whatever. Um, Made another video I didn't think much of, and but just banging a little bit into the conversation of this, the functionality of human beings and the perception of these different idealisms of where we're heading and what the whole project involves. And I just thought it was very superficial in the sense of this perception of the project just being getting through your stupid life, and his mantra, um, his whatever, his 12-stepper philosophy, comes up with the slogan. It's kind of like an Anacontavad, don't be a pussy. And that's the best you can do in terms of defining what victory is in this silly game is, don't be a pussy. I mean, it's just too um, empty and trivial and silly and meaningless and nonsensical, a kind of thing to say in the face of a world that is so well, there's another guy who's semi-hostile to the idea of social justice or fixing anything, and it's this whole idea that we live in a world where you can't even apply such silly statements because people live and have to overcome such different levels of um, disability or lack of skill or lack of attribute, um, and so it just doesn't mean anything. In my opinion, is useless mush. Beyond the idea that certainly I would agree that uh, you know try to maximize your performance is kind of a good idea. Get the most you can out of whatever you've got. Um, uh, but this idea that fighting is in and of itself, resisting whatever temptation there might be to just give up, is idiotic. We should all be fed up and frustrated and nauseous and sick of this really bad boat ride. It is a lifeboat. It is horror. And there's people who are just trying to contrive excuses to do this tap dancing and stuff on the Titanic. They're just being obstinate and even aggressive in their effort to pretend the reality doesn't exist. And that's all it really is. It's just saying, well, you can't fix it, so just pretend it doesn't exist. And that's a great victory because you got a good dance out of it. And you weren't going to do anything anyway, and blah, 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 blah. And the problem with that whole bullshit is that if you have a bunch of people distracted by tap dancing, on while the boat's sinking, there's every probability that that group of people may have been able to do something as a group to stop the boat from sinking. They could have possibly done something, but they were all so busy trying to do this, what's in it for me, I'll salvage what little bit I can out of me personally, bullshit, that they didn't do what was possible, and they just pretended it wasn't. Um, and I'd say on this lifeboat, there's very real and simple and obvious and easy to see ways of stopping the harm, which relates to another video by the Steel Air, who I guess I'll mention the what the fuck anyway. But anyway, and we're just talking on the subject of these simple ways you can prevent harm, like doing the vegetarian vegan thing. Um, it's not that complicated. And these people who are just pretending everything is out of their control or they're not a cause of any of the effects, um, are just running from the whole class of all action. And that's why they're so hostile to this idea of anything called a social justice or fixing or doing, um, because that will require something from them, and they don't want to have to make any contributions. They just want to tap dance. And yet they'll, in some cheap philosophical way, acknowledge that their tap dance is frivolous and useless. That's the other irony of it. They'll concede what I would argue is the first step to knowing thyself is understanding that we're just descendants of biological organisms and that our function is completely owned by that negative kind of circumstance, in the sense of negative in the sense that the biological agenda isn't a sophisticated, intelligent agenda. It's crude and cruel and doesn't have any high-minded elements. They're all lowbrow, you know, crude, um, um, you know, I don't know, violent, mean, you know, nasty attributes that will give you the weapons necessary to survive in the natural environment. And you know, it's, yeah, it just doesn't, it isn't going to write a good book on its own. It requires this whole evolution of intelligence and the acquisition of a competing theory of existence than the one your biology provides, which just says, you know, hot chick, go fucky. Which, you know, brings up another, you know, person, you know, radical feminist types who, you know, just can't see past those crude definitions. So, you know, here I am arguing for, in some sense, a recognition of the crude values and negative nature of our psychology, and yet some people take that knowledge and go way too far with it and kind of presume there's no reclamation at all. There's no capacity to moderate or mitigate against, have thoughts that make you better than just a rapist, for example. So, you know, the feminists who would say all men are rapists or something aren't appreciating that not all men are without the benefit of some sort of knowledge of right and wrong, and you know, in the context of civilization and decency, and even in the context of knowing thyself, in the sense of knowing that your, you know, nature is kind of a crocodile, and that if you're going to do something good in the world, you're not going to be able to behave like a crocodile, and you can sort of understand that. And it all kind of depends on your definition of these acts of violence or aggression or disparagement would probably be the better, you know, a lack of respect that is fundamental in the nature of our interactions with each other, in the sense that we interact with each other in such a predatorial way, predatorial in the sense of what's in it for me. Our friendships and our, especially love, that's, you know, why I'm so hostile against that word, is because it's directed based on things that have nothing to do with the actual, what's inside the brain of the person in many cases. Very little to do. So I don't want to, again, I don't want to commit the same crime of assuming that no one can be functionally act above that, but I'm just saying that clearly the idea of what men love is this idea of possession and of a jewel, a shiny thing, a trophy wife, and you know, their obsession, even biological one, on these visual signals that they've been conditioned to see as the winning stuff, the good stuff, the prime, the premium. And again, it doesn't have anything necessarily to do with the quality of the person, their mental acuity and competence or any of that kind of stuff, and it just has to do with this stupid skin bag aesthetic crap. And you know, women are also guilty of being triggered emotionally by certain signals of competence or authority or skill, or, you know, certain measurements of what a man is that aren't very deep. They're superficial and kind of just cliche, cheap definitions that don't have anything to do with actual accomplishment, like when men inherit money and it appears that they know what they're doing. Therefore they earned it or something, and, you know, obviously not. So but yeah, there's something just so overtly rapey just in the idea that such a strong, such a high percentage, I don't know exactly how to say it, of what motivates a male is in the category of this trivial and superficial cartoon character description of the person they're supposed to be in love with. It's not a deep appreciation. It's a superficial appreciation that motivates them. They have to be pretty enough, I guess I'm just saying. It's a silly, standard for devotion and obsession and interest. And then again, you can go to the whole story of knowing thyself would also be knowing the tragedy that is the fact that even if I give you what you want, it won't fix your wanting problem. That very shortly you'll be cheating on your trophy wife with some other trophy. You'll be looking still, seeking, because that's the nature of our psychology, is to just keep us motivated, because demotivation means you would die in nature. So you must stay motivated. You must be compelled. I'm not saying you don't. Nature doesn't provide for periods of depression and quiet time because you're just not functioning well enough. But certainly, you can't. You're not gonna. You can't do that every day. Um, the rebuilding process or whatever you want to call it psychologically. So, and then again, that has our psychology. Knowing thyself is knowing that we did evolve in this social thing, this bubble chamber of horrible social values of hierarchy and dominance and alpha males and all of that crap, and it's all quite disgusting and horrible, what it has done to us in terms of what makes us crippled, because all of those things, all of that crippling is part of the way it doesn't turn into violence. And so your submission, depression might just be a symptom of being obliged to submit to failures that aren't your own, but just are practically necessary because there can't be more than one king and all that kind of crap. So, unless you can win the battle, you're not allowed to fight the battle kind of argument. Has to be a realistic chance that you can overthrow the king, or you'll be disabled from having any kind of from fulfilling any kind of alpha ambitions and all that kind of stuff. So psychology certainly is a subject where you can go into a lot of detail in terms of analyzing what compels us. But the theme, the big picture way of diagramming it, to make it so it's understandable, is just to understand we have a psychology and to concede that it creates these optimism biases and that it creates all of this passion and perception of necessity and importance and a lot of crap that, to be rational you have to see past. Now again, in pointing out that the mechanisms of your attachment to people are corrupted by trivial and superficial crap, that it sucks that you measure the value of people based on some stupid cuteness factor or something. Like that has something to do with your judgment. It's kind of embarrassing and silly. That's one of those things where you can't necessarily fix that. So you would concede to it. You might even act on it. But you do it with the knowledge that you're only doing that because there's no satisfactory solution. You can't fix it. But you wouldn't make more of it, so we're back to this fundamental argument that no one's obliging you to hate your life. No one's obliging you to not be hungry, not feel proud, not to do all this bullshit. the obligation is to recognize the context in which you're doing it, and that you really are just tap dancing on the Titanic, and you're doing it for silly little ego reasons and because you're a silly person by nature, and that if you had the power to vote or to do something, you certainly should know that's not a silly world you'd remake. You're not going to do, you're not going to make the 2 version of that movie. You know, Be Stupid 2 or Be Stupid 3. No, it just doesn't deserve a sequel and a repeatal. It just isn't good enough. It's not a good enough story, and that's the story of your life, this internal bullshit that you contrive to make you see purpose in your struggle, you know, for your acquisition of your temporary and, like I said, usually trivial accomplishments. So it's just understanding we're just dumb animals. We are pretending we're making a really good movie. You know, it's like the little rascals and they're putting on a show. You know, and Alfalfa can't sing worth shit, and it's just really bad. You know, so no, let's just not do it. We're not good enough performers. We're not good enough directors. We're not good enough producers. We're not good enough at making the film. So it really shouldn't get made. Because what it's made out of is this whole horribly attritive, it murders a lot of shit, and it brutalizes a lot of shit, and rapes a lot of shit, and it destroys a lot of shit, and it leaves a lot of corpses and zombies, and it's just really, really bad. In terms of all the horror, and the horror's real. I mean, that's another one of those facts that I guess the tap dancers have some way to separate themselves from. You know, it's the animals don't really feel. They just kind of pretending they do. They're just, you know, they're just whiners about nothing. They don't really have a problem. You know, whatever the rationalizations used to negate the existence of the horror, you know, and even the horror happening to other human beings. You know, people watch this stuff, and you know, I have my brain stuns sometimes at what they will find entertaining in terms of, let's watch the 911 show, you know. Let's watch people's real drama of horror. And terrible, you know, having your arm ripped off. Yeah, that's a great story. Let's go watch the have your arm ripped off story. Why would I watch that? You know, so I mean that's a level of psychology or a depth of. I mean, they've ventured into a place I can't really imagine being there. It's hard for me to imagine where I could actually benignly watch that kind of stuff, because my conditioning from very early on was a recognition that I wasn't the only kind of thing that was experiencing and dying. So, you know, when I saw a bug squished, I thought about, ooh, I wonder what it's like to be squished. You know, that's my way of viewing the world from the beginning, that has given me a perspective that just doesn't find it possible to watch something else ripped to pieces without it somehow affecting me in terms of thinking about, ooh, am I going to get ripped to pieces? I don't want to be Fubar. And that's my reaction, is I don't want that. Somehow that doesn't fit into my narrative as a good time. And somehow for these other people, it's not a problem. I just will ignore that or pretend it's not going to happen to me. That only happens to the people on TV. It doesn't happen to me. I'm on this side of the TV. What happens on TV doesn't happen to people. It only happens to the people on TV, and they're not people. They're just little flat, pixelated images of little points of light. Little points of light. They're not real. I don't know what they do. I don't know what the thought process is, but yeah, it doesn't do anything for me in terms of a thought process, because I'm still, in grade school you hear about Lincoln, right, getting assassinated, and I remember reading some biography that was explaining all of the bullshit that happened when Lincoln got shot, the doctors are sticking probes in trying to hit the bullet, and then they'd be able to grab the bullet and do this, and they were pushing the bullet further in, and all this, just, and I still run that narrative in my head when my head drifts into some sort of circumstance like that, thinking about, Kennedy's head blown off and then Lincoln's probes, and I mean, my brain goes there, and I just imagine well, this is not an acceptable circumstance. It's not acceptable. I mean, this isn't what I mean, if this is going to be in the movie and I'm playing that character, fuck that. You know, no. And I don't know why other people can't just acknowledge the no part here and say, okay, let's just do our little tap dancing, but let's acknowledge that's all just psychological bullshit, and this is really just horror. Just, and we're just putting lipstick on the pig. That's all this is. This is optimism bias. This is, let's pretend we're something more than we are, parasitic, usuries, horrifically exploitive by nature organisms. And let's just quit putting lipstick on the fucking pig when it's time to have a conversation about whether sperm and egg should be mixed together and create more victims. Because that's all they're going to be, is another victim. They'll get to the top of the mountain, they'll slip on some ice, and they'll tumble down for the next 45 years. Just hitting their face on rocks. And you're not doing anybody a favor. Throwing them off, it really is just the silliest thing. You're just saying, you're just pushing them through a machine that, train wreck, train wreck, train wreck. And, so this is another thing where, the lipstick is on the pig. And so people see the little cute grandchildren, and they just don't see the rest of the context of the probe pushing the bullet in deeper, and they don't see where it's going to end. They don't see he's going to be caught extorting money and doing this and that, and they don't see any of the crap that's going to go with that narrative, and it's not going to, the odds are so slim that it's going to be you escape with either your dignity or not being absolutely tortured. Because you won't. There's a very low likelihood you'll escape your encounter with life without either being tortured by your life or by you being a lousy, rotten scumbag. There's just no other way it's going to work out. So anyway, that's enough of a video, I suppose. So, till the next time, and such. More to come, probably, but I'll try to make it different. It'll be more with different in it. Yeah. Or the same, but served differently. Or cooked differently, but pretty much the same. Or something like that. Anyway.